So, the first company to introduce the 33 and a third RPM micro groove vinyl LP was Columbia Records. On June 18, 1948, Columbia Records held a press conference at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York City. This is the Waldorf Astoria, pretty nice place. And they invited the press and they showed off their brand new 33 and a third RPM records. Now they introduced the new format as long playing micro groove records. They played longer than 78, so that's where the long play comes from. That's why they're called LPs. Now the micro groove also allowed for better sound and slowed down the speed to fit more music on the record. Suddenly, you had up to 50 minutes of music on one side of a record, no more one song per side, flipping over 78s anymore. Also made of non-breakable vinyl light. That's the stuff that records are still made of today. It's polyvinyl chloride is what it is. It's not exactly non-breakable, but compared to 78s, it was a huge improvement. And they introduced the format in two sizes, 10-inch LPs and 12-inch LPs. The initial records are quite thick as well too. For the first couple of decades even, when vinyl records were introduced, they were a lot thicker than they would eventually become. These are actually 220 gram records. 180 gram is a pretty common number. You hear records being released as a 180 gram reissue. It's a thicker record. They say better sound, and these ones 220 grams. So you can see they don't bend very easily. It's kind of hard to show you how thick they are. They're pretty solid, but this again, the 10-inch. We'll show you with the 12-inch. The classical records with the blue label for Columbia. So the 12-inch record, 220 grams, doesn't bend very well, and I do this. Pretty solid. Not a lot of give there. That's a good record. By comparison, this is an album, it's a compilation released in 1980 and much more flexible. Records became a lot thinner over the years, as you can see. So now, the 78s, they open from the top. That's how you get a record out of a 78 envelope, was basically from the top of the envelope. So, the first records were 10 inches to fit in with any 78 holders you may have had, and the records came out from the top. That's how they opened. So to begin with, Columbia released 133 33 and a third micro groove vinyl records. That's right, they released 133 33 and a third RPM records. So, of those 133 titles released by Columbia on June 18th, 85 of them were 12-inch classical LPs, like these two right here. They were numbered ML4001 to ML4085. This is 4012, and this is 4023. Also, they released 26 10-inch classical LPs, beginning with ML2001. That's this one right here, the very first 10-inch classical LP released by Columbia Records. Beethoven Symphony No. 8 in F major, Bruno Walter conducting the Philharmonic Symphony Orchestra of New York. So in the initial run, the first pressing of vinyl albums released on June 18th, the first 50 or so had this cover right here. The pink cover with the music stand. There's the baton in there, the metronome, and the musical score down there wrapped up in a bow. Pretty simple. There was also another cover design that would be released, and that's this one here, the Grecian column design. So a couple of generic covers are what you had initially released. What they likely did was they probably pressed maybe 100,000, 150,000 records. It's hard to say for that time, but they would do an initial pressing. That's where this record comes from here. Then they released those onto the market. If things sold well, they would do another pressing, which they likely did probably in the fall of 1948 to get records out there again for the Christmas season. So there are a few differences between the initial first pressing and later pressings of these albums. Now this one, again, is an original from the first pressing, and you can tell initially by the cover. It's thinner, it's kind of a card paper sort of material, and it opens from the top. Also, the label. The Columbia label changed after the first pressing. The initial pressing looks like this label right here. It's the red label with the Columbia lettering, very big on top. The bottom, it says Long Plain Micro Groove, the LP in the middle, and then the Columbia logo, very small, right underneath the song titles and the songwriters. And that's the Columbia logo, and that is the original label from the first pressing in 1948. Now this record here is CL6005, so it is from 1948, but it's a second pressing because you can see it opens from the side like this, and then here is the updated Columbia label. Not a big difference, but down on the bottom, the Long Plain Micro Groove is smaller, and the Columbia logo plus LP is bigger. Here you have the original label right there, and then the second run of label right there. The back covers of the records are all pretty much the same. They're generic designs. They have the artist information, plus the song titles, serial number, and then a write-up about the artist. When Dinah Shore sings, everyone within hearing distance slows down his pace to listen. There you go. How do you not buy that record? So the generic cover was used by Columbia Records. As you can see, the initial releases, Grecian column. There's also the music stand design, and both of these designs were done by Alex Steinwise, the inventor of the album cover. Alex also designed the envelope, the way the sleeve is folded together, the flaps, and the record goes in. That was all designed by Alex Steinwise. Now, the reason they did the generic covers was because they didn't have a lot of time. 133 titles, they had to get them printed, they had to get them out. So rather than come up with 133 new covers, they decided to go with a couple of generic covers. They could have used the previous covers. All of these albums are reissues that came out on June 18th, 48, but they didn't want to confuse the public. Why have the same cover on a different product? So this is what they did. Now, over time, the covers did change. For instance, this one, Rumba with Cugat, Xavier Cugat, CL6005, that was released initially looking like this in 1948, and then later, the cover changed to this. Now, the generic album cover was a pretty common thing for the first few years of the release of the 33 RPM vinyl records. So not just repeating generic covers, but also using the same photos for several releases. So it took a little time for the album cover to evolve, and we'll continue the evolution of the album cover on the next episode of The Art of the Album Cover.